hydrant that goes up to the center of town. It's part of our whole firefighting network. So yes, flow to that pond could still be maintained, whatever happens at Mill Pond. Kent, would you like to say something?
Just the elevations. The
Yeah.
elevation of Mill Pond now is about +12. The outlet of Mill Pond is +10, 2 feet
Yep.
below that. There's 2 feet of flashboards.
Right.
The Maley Pond is +8, so there's 2 foot of drop between the outlet of Mill Pond and Maley Pond. So there's plenty of grade to get water away.
Well, the other thing is about you concerned about the cost of dredging. That's what this article is coming before the town is to do, is to find out what the cost would be. And it's not going to go any further than permitting until the cost is determined and that people decide to do the next step.
Right.
And that's when a lot of these
So this
things
is
will be-
$30,000 on top of $25,000 that's already been spent to
and
look
then
into
20,000
dredging.
before that. There's
Yep.
lots of money.
So there's
spent.
been a lot of money spent on dredging design, and my point is that I would like the conversation to expand to not just be talking about dredging, but to talk about being able to make a decision that's slightly outside the box. Did you? My mother has a question.
Several questions that you were successful in getting a grant.
That's a good point.
To
I got a
do
grant.
this, so why is it not possible for the town to,
Yeah.
or the pond, whatever, to look for grants?
The Mill Pond Committee was going to look for grants. I don't know, if, Anna, if you want to talk about why that didn't happen.
I'll try to talk.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, God.
I think that, well, when we looked into it further, there's an awful lot of engineering that would be involved. Plus, even if you did that, created a wetland, which you would have to do in order for the state to give you grant money to also dredge. You still are going to have to dredge over the years that little area at the top. And so it was that ongoing maintenance that sounded like it wasn't such a great idea. And then people decided that they'd rather just do a simple dredging. And we do have estimates on that cost, and that's according, pardon?
What are those?
200,000 for the smallest amount of dredging,
Up to
3,150 cubic feet or something. That was in the ESS study, the most recent study. That was
But right
the
now,
lowest
what we
amount.
don't have is, like I got a, one of the reports I have is a draft site recon and preliminary evaluation of probable cost for dam removal at Mill Pond. And in here, there's a number, and it's based on every bit of work that would have to happen in order for the dam to be removed. That number's been taken out of context a few times, but it is based on real numbers. What an engineer would cost, what the excavator would cost, what permitting would cost. What we don't have yet from the Mill Pond Committee is that kind of a cost breakdown on exactly what the real costs are. I do know that in Long Island, there's been a project on the Carmen's River over the last 7 years, and they just did it last year. They started dredging. They had a $4 million budget for 2 ponds, and they got halfway through the first one, and they ran out of money. The cost overruns were huge. The complications they encountered were huge. They ended up having to deal with dredge spoils that were contaminated with heavy metals. The early numbers are not always the actual numbers. They run into problems. So the main thing is just being able to have a conversation about other possibilities and looking at the whole picture, the habitat value of this stream and as it relates to Tisbury Great Pond, and not just being locked into maintaining a particular thing at Mill Pond. And I don't know. Yeah, Emma, thanks.
Would it be safe to say that the likelihood of grant money being available for dam removal is much greater than for dredging, because all of the scientific minds in the state think dam removal is a good idea. So we have that behind that concept, which supports the possibility of
and that's
grant
something
money.
Beth Lambert talked about when she was here. You know, she held up Mike Chominski's report. Mike's the engineer who wrote this. The probable cost, estimate cost was $568,000. She gave me a chart of 8 dams that have been removed in southeastern Mass in the last 10 years. And in some of them, I think there was some at Red Brook, the cost was $200,000 and the town paid $3,000. There is significant grant money available. I mean, it's going away a little bit, but there's significant grant money available. Some of these projects are paying 3% of the total cost of dam removal. But the thing my mother and I were talking about the other day is I have about this much self-confidence when it comes to speaking in front of a crowd like this. I have no technical capability. I never had written a grant in my life. I got hooked up with the people at the Sea Run Brook Trout Coalition, which is a nonprofit devoted to preserving sea run brook trout habitat. And I managed to write a grant. My friend B. Fear was good enough to give it to her Edie Foundation board, and we got the money. So I kind of feel like, hey, if I can write a grant and get money, anybody can write a grant and get money. And I would want to see, I mean, the Mill Pond Committee went to the town and they asked for permission to pursue grant funding and then didn't. One of the things that came up at one of their meetings was that it was really hard to do. And it's like, yes, it is hard to do, and there's a reason for that. Oh, Barbara Day.
Well, I think one reason is that, of course, before you ask for grant money, you want to make sure that's what the people of the town want to do, and so forth, because I'm sure that there are also other ways of getting money besides the grant money. I think you can have, as you know, $20,000 has already been raised. People who are interested in contributing to the studies that are coming up. And another thing is that the 2 articles on the warrant are sort of a beginning step, as Pudi has pointed out, to look at the watershed, see what that has to say, and so forth. And then when all that data is in, then we can decide at the next town meeting in a year or so what it is we want to do. Do we want to dredge? Which I think you have to do, even if you're going to do a stream. According to the people you had down here last year, they said you have to dredge that too.
That's not the way they put it. And the presentations are actually on file at the West Tisbury Library. Tom Mayhew's been good enough to film them. So there's a presentation by Beth Lambert from DER, that's at the library, and also from Mike Hopper. Those DVDs are there. And there's also a presentation of last January's informational meeting at the House. So all 3 of those are on record at the library, if anybody wants to see them.
But the woman who spoke to me said they needed to dredge too, but I'm not really talking about that.
No, that's fine, because there are pictures of stream restoration projects where you see a backhoe in the stream, and it's the only time you want to see heavy equipment anywhere near a wetland. It's not dredging, it's just removing some of the structure and the, like the dam bulkheads.
Speaking of channel, they're actually doing a stream restoration. They just completed it a couple weeks ago at Town Brook up in Plymouth. The town of Plymouth has actually been one of the leaders in the state and the country in terms of dam removals on these coastal streams. They successfully removed 1 dam structure, and they removed another one last month, and they're on tap for removing another one. So it's actually, Plymouth, America's hometown or whatever, they're taking the lead in removing these dams.
Chris? And then Susan?
I understand the costs involved in dredging, but I don't understand why there'd be costs involved in pulling out 2 dam boards. That seems to me to be a no-brainer.
Well, the funny thing is that a man who shall remain nameless told me that the Halloween joke here used to be to pull boards on the mill pond, or April Fools. April Fool's Day is coming, Chris. You and I. No, but the lifting the boards is the problem. What happens sometimes, I think, which is what Michael talked about in his report at Mill Pond, is because of new stream crossing standards and state highway guidelines, you would have to make sure there was an opening under Eggertown Road that was big enough to accommodate a 500-year storm event.
So there is one today, just downstream of the dam boards by about 6 feet.
Right.
So why would you need to change that in any way? We've taken the dam boards out before
You might
without
remember.
having to go to the state highway
I think you
department.
were at the meeting in January last
I
year.
was there.
And one of the things that Michael said was, you know what, for very cheap, for very little money, you could just take those boards out and see what happened. And Kent's, I think was it you and Little Everett replaced the boards, or was it Bill?
My son Bill.
Yeah, I knew you were there. But it's not hard to take those boards out. I have a flat bar in my
I
truck.
kind
It
of
would-
remember that. It's
Right.
not hard.
So what Michael said was, you know, instead of spending money on all this expensive engineering, you could just pop the boards out and see what happened to the stream channel. It would answer a lot of questions about everything we're talking about. Everett Healy,
Yeah, when I was there, I went swimming in Mill Pond,
I saw that.
and it was really hot water.
There you go. Sue.
Yeah, this is ground you may already have covered at other meetings, in which case,
Feel
just
free.
say that. We're talking about stream restoration, so what would be alternative designs for stream restoration? What happens
Yeah.
to that land to the left of the stream? Does it just go to wetlands? Does it become a park for West Tisbury?
There's two parts to that. Johnny Boy had a great idea last year, and we talked about it at one of the meetings. One is that there's been a lot of letters about, oh, it's just going to be a shrub-infested swamp, and it's going to look horrible. Other towns that have removed their impoundments have managed parts of those former impoundments as town parks. Johnny's idea was, okay, so instead of having 2.5 acre Mill Pond, we now have 2.5 acre Mill Brook Park. We have a place where you can have open areas. You want to make sure that the stream, you know, there's the Wetlands Protection Act, there's our local wetlands protection bylaw, but there is latitude for applications to be made for management of those areas. What was the first part of your question, though? Because I brought to mind something else.
Alternatives. I mean, if we're going to look at dredging, then maybe parallel to that, we should be looking at
Yeah.
visual alternatives. Because I think part of the issue is Mill Pond is so scenic. Well, that's
Right.
not the only scenic option.
Right.
And so what are they?
Okay, so something else I worked on this winter, and I got waylaid by a couple of personal things. I talked to a guy at the Conway Landscape Design School who said that he could put a group of students on some kind of a graphic representation of what this might look like if we were to store it. I fell up against a hard deadline of a grant deadline. I couldn't do it. I had a health thing going on. The cost was something, I think it was like $6,500 for a 3-month student project where at the end they would hold several public hearings. I would still like to see our town do that, something like that with the Conway Landscape Design School. The guy's name was Dave Northridge. Don't quote me. But I need help. This is the kind of thing I need help with. I mean, I'm just one person. I only have so much time. I don't make any money. So if any of you are willing to help me come up with, working with a group like David's, to come up with some kind of conceptual design of what the possibilities are. And in the meantime, something Steve and I talked about with Nelson Bryan earlier was, is dredging Mill Pond to 4 feet deep, what's it going to get us? Is it going to get us cooler water temperatures?
No.
Okay. Is it going to do anything to improve habitat for our fish?
Not as much as removal of the dam.
Okay. So the goal is so what would we be dredging it for? Right now the pond is very healthy. The water quality is good. Bill Wilcox is the only one who has done extensive water testing on Mill Pond and Mill Brook. He said that the rate of turnover is 2 pond volumes a day. So the rate of water turnover in that pond is very good. That means that it's basically flushing. It's not a stagnant, nasty sewer. So there's really no rush to get into doing anything. He also said in his report that it is hard to define Mill Pond as eutrophic or highly eutrophic or anything else because of that good water quality that we have. The other thing to keep in mind is that the conservation groups on the vineyard, including the Land Bank, Nature Conservancy, Vineyard Conservation Society, have all spent large amounts amounts of money conserving the Mill Brook corridor. There's the Woods Preserve, there's Sheriff's Meadow Foundation, Roth Woodlands, there's the land bank at Wiscosum's, there's the land bank down at Green Hickey Fields. So there's been a lot of money invested in protecting the corridor, but not so much attention has been paid to the brook itself and the health of the fisheries and the habitat therein. So I'm going to tap you, Sue. You're going to help me with this project. All right, good. You got nothing else to do. Chris.
Rudy,
I have
something,
nothing to do.
Yeah.
nobody said anything about this, and I don't mean to be throwing a red herring out there in Mill Brook, but you know, we need an all-purpose bike path from the police station to Brandy Brow.
Okay.
How come we're not talking about widening the dam all the way its length and putting in this all-purpose path? Either whether you dredge or you drain it, either way we should.
We can make that part of the proposal for what the Mill Brook Park could look like. Could we?
Yeah, I mean, one example to look at is actually the town of Plymouth, if you've ever been down there, Plymouth Rock. They actually did a little park at the lower reaches of Town Brook. They called it Booster Gardens, where they've kind of redone it with the idea of making it friendly to all the tourists that come down and visit the Mayflower and Plymouth Rock. So that might be one idea to look at for some sort of conceptual design. It's called Brewster Gardens, I think.
Okay.
It's right in downtown Plymouth, just a stone's throw away from Plymouth Rock.
Yeah, nice. Amanda.
I'm just curious, I may have missed this, but when was the last time the pond was dredged?
40 years.
1970, and at that time, there's really no records of what the pond depth was before they started. The only thing we know is that they dredged along the west bank and beefed up there's a little park trail along the west bank. And then they dug a bit of a hole right in front of the police station where the spillway is. And there's no data as to whether Mill Pond was ever even more than 1.5 feet deep. We had lunch with Nelson Bryant before we came here. And I asked Nelson, I said, you know, you're 91 almost. What's your recollection? And he said it was always about chest height, and he did go in, along the west bank and in front of the police station, and everywhere else about 1 foot deep. And actually, in 2006, the Conservation Commission had a baseline assessment done of Mill Pond, and this is the bathymetry map, and that's what it shows. So we don't know that Mill Pond is filling in. I think the only thing we do know is that between the two surveys that have been done, the bathymetry surveys, this was 2006. The Mill Pond Committee had ESS Group do one in 2011, which actually showed that the pond volume increased in that time. The pond got deeper. And we had a couple of really big rain events in that time, which if you were on the Mill Pond Dam in April of 2011, like I was, the pond was about almost 20 inches above normal, and the water was brown. That organic muck is really readily mobilized and goes. What was your question? So yeah, 1970, and the only time there's a record of it before that was the Grange doing some work of hand-pulling weeds back in the 40s. Before that, we don't know, but Dick might know.
There was some.
No, I think you're right.
That's all that's on the records anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Julianne, and then the woman in the sweater, okay.
I actually want to thank Steve for coming down, but I also want to especially thank Prudy for being persistent about this topic. And I just think that it's, you know, your persistence is what is allowing us to learn a little bit more about the science, the science of this, and which can lead to options. And I think that we haven't really known the science. At least I haven't. It's news to me, and it's very helpful, and I hope it will open up options for what can happen there.
And you?
There are two brooks, am I correct? Furnace Brook and Mill Brook, they go on either side of the old mill?
Okay, no, those are other diversions. What you have is Mill Brook comes down, oh, you don't have it up on anything. Comes down North Road here, follows North Road actually all the way, comes down along State Road, hits the, right about Scotchman's, there's one diversion that comes over here to the Parsonage Pond. There's some more that feeds some private ponds on Old County Road. There's another diversion from the southwest corner of Mill Pond, that's called Factory Brook. That goes down to Maley's Pond, and then it rejoins Mill Brook right above Town Cove. So there's a lot of little monkeying around this area where a lot of man-made diversions were created. So it's Mill Brook, and then Factory Brook is a diversion of Mill Brook. Does that answer your question?
How difficult would it be to keep the brook, to keep one of those brooks and to keep the pond too?
To keep the mill pond? Right now you have it all. But the mill pond is warming up Mill Brook to about 90 degrees, 85, 90 degrees for most of the summer.
Right. I'm just thinking of the old
Yep.
mill. And when I'm
Right.
at the old mill, as you're facing it, there's a really strong brook that goes on the left side.
Yep,
And
that's Mill
Factory
Brook.
Brook that goes to Maley's. And what I'm saying is there a way we could keep a piece of the pond and divert the Mill Brook so it would be its own entity and stay cold?
Yeah, what you're talking is what's called a bypass channel.
Yes.
It actually, the Natural Resources Conservation Service has been working with a lot of cranberry bog owners to create bypass channels, because all the things we talked about, dams on rivers, well, the same thing happens when you build a cranberry bog on a river. A lot of our old cranberry bogs are called run-of-river bogs, and so whatever you put on the cranberry bog, you are basically putting on the stream. So actually, the Natural Resource Conservation Service has been promoting and helping fund what are called bypass channels. So basically, you take the stream above the cranberry bog, you run it to the side, and you have an exit. And actually, one of the projects that we're working on at Century Bog, or at Red Brook, which is the headwaters of Century Bog and White Island Pond, the state just purchased Century Bog back in 2010. And the Makepeace Company has been growing cranberries there for 5 years, and right now we have a plan to restore wetland habitats at the headwaters of Red Brook. And one of the things we're looking at is creating a bypass channel. So instead of running the river through the middle of the bogs where it encounters the warming and all the other detrimental impacts, we're shunting it to the side. So it's called a bypass channel. So that's
And
an alternative.
how expensive would that be compared to trying to make a new recreation area?
It all depends on the site. That's what you'd have to talk to an engineer about that to get the exact figures. I mean, here on the island, everything probably costs a lot more to get the equipment down. What are you going to do with the material? So that's all very site specific, and you have to contact an engineering firm to get valid cost estimates.
Another thought is that police building going to be used for anything?
There's
You could maybe
nothing-
take part of that property and make a channel.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because Tim Boland had an idea that that could be the historical like a natural history museum for Mill Brook. That, it could be like a, what do you call it, interpretive center for, the fisheries of Mill Brook, that festivals could happen. We could have the herring festival where we actually have herring going up. I know, I hate festivals. You won't see me there, but you all have a good time. But no, I mean, when you think about it, we have all these, I teased, when Steve and I first got in contact, I was emailing him to say, why are we stocking these stupid fat trout in this hot pond? They're not going to live. And I said, we have these very interesting, like, it used to be that the herring came up the brook at the same time the shad bush was blooming. You had these things that were connected. Now we have a truck that shows up from, where is the Sandwich Hatchery?
Yeah.
And they dump these fat, stupid trout. And when we were having lunch with Nelson, Ruth said that Jeff wanted to know when the truck was coming, because 65-year-old Jeff is out there with his fishing pole right behind the truck. So it's interesting how we've come to accept these, that's like a new tradition, is a truck bringing our fish instead of our fish swimming up the brook.
But if you had the bypass, so
Right.
you still have the fish, you have the waterfowl
Yeah.
on the other side, and a picturesque view.
Yeah. There's any number of possibilities. You could come work with me. Yeah.
Maybe I would.
And David, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Or B,
I was just going to say, the police station is a complicated reuse issue because it's in the historic district, it's in the village residential district, it doesn't have any significant septic capacity,
Right.
and it's using
Perfect for a nature center.
It's perfect for a nature center.
I can just say one thing. And I
Oh,
wanted to
sorry about
repeat
your
is-
voice.
Oh, I know, I'm very sorry. I hope it's better by town meeting.
Okay.
Both studies have said without question, and I don't know why Bill Wilcox said what he said, but that the pond is in a eutrophic state, meaning that there's full of rich sediment, and it just increases the growth of the vegetation in the pond year after year after year.
Something,
And
oh, I'm sorry.
that was why they said, if you want a pond, you need to touch it.
The reason I go with what Bill said is 2010, he has a draft final water quality survey of Mill Brook, is because he's the only one who's gone out in the brook and actually sampled the water. And he was the water quality planner of the commission for the last 25 years. He's the one I'm going to go with. One of the problems, something you won't see in either of those reports is that you have to dredge the mill pond tomorrow or it's going to die. There's no timeline about an urgency. So that's another reason. And you were one of the ones who was very receptive when I came to your Mill Pond Committee, and we talked about this compromise idea, like Millbrook Park, and I still would like to get back to that guy at the Conway Landscape School and maybe get some people to work with me on that conceptual design, because I think it would really help people. I think there's a fear factor of, ew, what's it going to look like? Ew. Because we're used to what we're used to. I mean, I grew up with the mill pond too. It's part of my heritage. My family's been here for 300 years. But the more I learn about the stream, the more appealing it is. So, I don't know. It's hard telling. Robin?
Well, I'm really torn. I'm glad to come and get my information from educated people instead of the letters to the editor, which is sometimes suspect where the information comes from. But what you're telling me, there's a number of these dams, and because they're privately owned, and of course the mill pond is owned by the town, so we have the ability as a group to do something about that. There's no real plan to do all of them, so we're doing it piecemeal. But to me, personally, I'm torn in the middle because I see removing all the mill ponds akin to tearing down all the stone walls on the island. It's very scenic. It's part of, like you said, part of our heritage. But people come here, the tourist dollars come here because of this also. So I would encourage the town. My first thought coming here was dredge the pond is a short-term solution and make it cooler, but that's not true. So now I'm thinking, take the dam out, but have a plan to restore the mill pond. Put a pond back in there, and restore the stream first, and then restore the mill pond instead of the reverse. That's the way I look at it. And it seems like everybody's saying if we can only have one or the other. Why can't we have both? I don't see why we can't have both.
Well, you can actually also do nothing in the meantime. You know, there's no rush to do anything.
No, I'm not saying do nothing.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's important to restore the stream from what I've heard. And I think there may be ways to divert water in some of these ponds to allow the trout to still pass.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
I mean, we're part of nature too. And we have the mill pond too, and the trout can have their stream. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I just hate to see all the mill ponds disappear.
Right.
And they might not have to.
Anna. And then Bob, I got you.